Right now I'd like to talk about the difference between knights and bishops, and more importantly, how their trait influences the game that we're playing. See, it's easy to make an exchange, especially for knight and bishop, because we know that those pieces are similarly equal. However, you need to know also that trading requires quite a bit of precision. And I'm going to give you a pretty good idea on how you can do this successfully. Let us go with a game that was played between Hermann Steiner and Ludwig Pachmann, two very strong grandmasters. Basically, after white played d4, knight f6, c4, black played bishop to b4, a3, exchange. So we have the first trade here. Now, everybody knows that this is the beginning of the so-called Nimzo-Indian. Now, it is known to be a fairly good opening, and it has good ideas in itself. But what really goes with this opening line is that as soon as black exchanges on the c3, like bishop takes the c3 and pawn takes the c3, white's pawns are actually getting doubled. Now, many people will be like, I don't know about that, Valeri. I'm not feeling comfortable. Do I really want to do it? And truth be told, you usually don't. But the thing about this move is that as soon as we play with the move of b takes to the c, we could very quickly deliver a plan with which our pieces can come closer and move towards the center. So this is what we're looking for right now. After the move of b takes to the c3 as it went, then basically black played with short castles here and d6. So now, as black has just done the move of pawn into the d6, he's getting ready to move himself and plan for e5. That's what he kind of wanted to do. And then after the move pawn up to d6, white played bishop to d3. So the double pawns seem like a long-term disadvantage, and then we have the bishop pair, which is also long-term. So which one should we trust? Truth be told, you should trust the one imbalance that provides better short or long-term prospects depending on the position. So let's elaborate a little bit on that. Whether it's a knight, bishop, or any other piece, there are two kinds of situations you want to think about. There are dynamic and there are static positions. The static positions are easy. There are the kinds of positions in which the situation or the structure is more or less simple and straightforward. That's called static position. And the most important thing about static positions is that they're easy to play. They're really simple. They're really easy to play. Now, dynamic positions, on the other hand, are much more complex. They're much more tactical. So what we care about out there is speed, being able to do things faster and easier. What you need to know about both of these two things is that when it comes down to a more of a, I'd call it a static position, all we care about in a more static position is us being able to develop and think in the longer run. In more dynamic position, example, more tactical position, we care a lot more about the short-term possibilities because the position is likely going to change. So, right now, whose advantage matters more? Does white's advantage matter more because of the bishop pair or black's advantage? Now, I'd say that the position is quite static. So, in the longer run, it looks like white's bishops may not be that important. Is that right? Not really. As I mentioned earlier, the bishop pair for white, as well as the double pawns, are two long short-term advantages. And given that the position is more static, they would both matter. But how do we know which one matters more? Now, that depends on the prospects of the position. And thinking about the prospects really brings me to a very valuable point I want to make in the topic of exchanges. Evaluate the imbalances. An imbalance is a certain thing that you do have or your opponent has that the other player doesn't. Could be good, could be bad, it really depends. But now we've got the imbalance of bishop pair versus double pawns. So which one really would matter? Well, I guess if white plays knight e2 and then pawn to e4 after some bits of preparation, things look really excellent. As opposed to that, I'm not so sure how black is going to take advantage of the c3 and c4 pawns. And even though it's early to predict, I still feel white has great ideas and important possibilities due to these good pieces. f3, bishop b7, short castles, rook a2, and rook f2. The build-up is amazing, and now you understand that the exchange in c3 not only doesn't give black an opportunity to make any serious threats, but it kind of makes it very difficult. And, it's just great. After that move, rook to the a from a to f2, black played pawn to the d5, and then white actually exchanged on the d5 with c6 to the d, so things his stuff is really good. So after c6 to the d, suddenly we realize there is this big change coming. And it's quite interesting to see that when those pieces exchange, suddenly black's position is completely horrible in every way possible. Why? It's not so much because, the exchange happened, but due to the fact that it did happen, there became some huge vulnerabilities that he's simply no condition to protect. Like, for example, the rook takes f7 move. This move is unstoppable, but, what really happens is that as the move is played, black is losing the game. He plays knight f6, queen b3, here, exchange, and then after knight x to the d5, there was d6 to the c, and bishop takes d. So, I think white made a mistake here. And now let's talk a little bit about the exchange that took place with bishop takes c3. See, I would like to say that the knight always looks kind of better. But something you want to realize too is that the knight, just as well, may actually be a bit short-term in terms of his goal and strength. The problem is that this knight on e3 would have been just left behind, and there is nothing that we had to worry about it. So when black played with the move of knight x to the e3, bishop takes c3, and then rook takes d3, white kind of missed something. What he should have done is to play rook b7, and then prepare himself to continue at rook f7. So that even though this bishop that seems backward and very ineffective at c1 could actually prove very important and good in the way as it goes. So then we have the challenge against the g7, then we have the possibility to attack him on both ways without rook, and obviously his position does not turn out good at all. It's a perfect example. After d6 to the c, b6 to the knight bishop takes to e3 in the trade. Now white took on the b6, he played rook c7 and a4. Of course, I have to say that no matter what, white's position remains superior, and it is going to become continuously brilliant as the game progresses. So after rook a e8, a little h3 move, king f2, and g4 seem to help out a lot. With the white king moving around and the pawns coming closer, obviously white had this brilliant position and the space. The king seems great, and even the white rook. Although I have to say that white made a little bit of a mistake earlier on, which made it difficult for him to win the game. I think all that white had to do was to basically try and not tie himself down by playing the move king d4. Even if black attacked it, in this case, white could have chosen a much more active position for his rook, and that would have been more than enough to guarantee his victory. But of course, he chose king d6, which led to rook c4 and all these little moves that led to a draw. But that's not important. The real important moments of this game was first of all the exchange on c3 and realizing how, even though the position is quite static and simple, the advantage of the bishop pair for white simply matters more, as black didn't have a chance to exploit it. Now, some of you will say, okay, but Valeri, this is a theoretical line. Black has his chances. Yes, he does. And I think it's not a terrible line. But I'm just trying to explain a logical way of seeing and understanding how things work, even if you don't know the theory. Something interesting that happened in this game was also the idea for a trade. White didn't do it for quite a while, and he picked up to do it just at that one time where he knew that this is going to help him. So try to follow that advice. Be very careful when it comes down to any exchange, and do it when you feel, hey, you know what? I'm going to open up my pieces. I'm going to get that rook up into play. I'm going to achieve this and that. In any other case, you'd rather like to delay it until that better time comes, and then you can do this in the right way. Let's take a look at another instructive example of bishops versus knight exchange. Next game was played between Emanuel Lasker and Zygmunt Tarash, two great masters of the past. Essentially, Lasker was playing with white, and he started playing against the Alekhine's defense. So it was a pretty good opening. Knight c3, knight f3, and bishop d3. Black did bishop g4, and ultimately white played bishop e2. I don't want to judge white's playing of the opening. I do want to say, though, that bishop e2 did not feel or fit like a really perfect move. But still, his idea became quite clear nevertheless. What he wanted to do was to solidify the position and make sure everything's right. And that kind of did happen. It really, went in the right way. After the move of bishop to the e2, black played bishop takes f3, g takes f3. Now let's discuss a little bit the exchange here. Is it a good idea to go on with such kind of a change, or is it not? How do we know, really? The rule of this is the following. If you're thinking about a trait, like say bishop takes f3 at this point, try to figure out exactly what is it going to bring to the player who makes it. In terms not so much of the immediate benefit, because the immediate benefit cannot be seen, but also what sort of vulnerabilities does it create? Now that with the move of bishop takes f3, apparently black's main goal was to create a little bit of a vulnerability inside the king's position. But something you will quickly find out is that it doesn't work as easy. What went wrong? Well, let's have a look. After bishop takes to the f3, white played g takes f3 and bishop f2. The exchange gave away a pretty significant advantage of the bishop pair, while actually the sad truth is that there isn't really a whole lot that black is getting for it. A little extra check from the h4 just doesn't make it up for the fact that white will counter, and then he played for rook to g1. I don't think that the last move, rook to the g1, was really that necessary for white. Even though he got a pretty advantageous position and a lot of possibilities with that move, there was another move that could have turned out much more effective. What could that move be? Take a moment to think. Remember, what you usually want to do is exchange any of your opponent's pieces that have advanced or moved closer to your territory, even if it's just for a moment, even if you don't know how or in what way those pieces are going to pose problems. Now the queen was the white turn. I think you should have traded. What he did was also not that bad. In the end of the day, it was a fine move. He just played with the move rook to the g1. But I think that queen c1 could have turned out actually a bit better as the game progressed. So Then castles, rook g4 and queen takes h2. Of course, when white challenged the queen, black just took the pawn. It makes a lot of sense for him to do that. Then white played rook h4, queen to g2. It was an interesting moment here to figure out what should black's best move be. Now here we're not talking about the exchange on c3. Apparently that type of trade is not going to work. It will just give away the bishop pair for black. He already lost the one bishop, so he doesn't want to lose the other. But then there is this question, alright, so he doesn't want to give away this piece. So how does he play? Well, to answer that question, I can do it pretty quickly, but to answer that question, I would like to suggest, first of all, look at the different trades and do it with an open mind. Any kinds of changes. You may know that deep down it's supposed to be wrong and it's really a bad idea to play it. But you know, when you think of it, you don't actually know that. You're just supposing. Because in reality, presently right now, black could have played the move of queen takes h4. And on its own, that move could have created some huge problems for white. Here's a good example why. After queen takes h, bishop takes h, rook takes d4. Wow, this looks crazy at first. Suddenly we realize that black is going to wipe out our center. And wherever the queen goes, there's going to be a rook takes h4. Further on, black's threatening or planning to do a move of knight to the d4. Most of our other pieces are quite backward, and it's just not a good position. The extra queen that white has really does not turn out to be that easy to utilize. And while black is going to awesomely position this rook on the h2 and have other pressure, we just have to sit back and not get to enjoy the possibilities of black's position. He's got moves like bishop takes to c3. He's got chances or challenges against our center. So those are just a few of the little things that would really matter. Now with the queen g2, it was different. There's bishop f1 here, and after that last move, of course, queen c2, pawn h5, and rook d1. Yeah, I gotta say that. Getting to support the center and backing it up like that just feels pretty powerful. I mean, why not? Looks like we don't have anything to worry about. Center is great, and a couple other pieces are just gonna guarantee us all. But then again, it's just not a very good position for white, for white anyway. Black already has quite a bit to show and prove or attack with. So he just played queen h6, bishop e7. Now, let's talk a little bit about the bishop versus knight at this point. What is more important, the white bishops or the black knights? Well, let's think about the prospect of those bishops. If you really think of it, you only get to see d5, which is impossible to make because white's king is on e1 and he doesn't want to open the position. So everything else pretty much that goes beyond that really turns out horrible for white. And that is the sad truth. It really turns out horrible. It's not a good idea. What happens in this moment is that white played bishop to the e2, queen takes f5, because black gave a bad exchange. Now, I know that I'm not talking specifically about bishop versus knight exchanges, but when we talk about trades, we can never talk about just one trade. We have to talk about a few, and we have to talk about any possible chance that there is for a trade. So why would that be a bad exchange? What would be the problem of this move? The real problem of the move is that as black played it, he didn't, at least in my opinion, he didn't realize that he was actually going to weaken his position horribly by changing the structure and leaving the pressure. All white had to do was probably d5, most likely a small move like pawn up to the b3, stabilizing the position, keeping it all in a good way, and making sure that there is no complications because black will stay behind. That's all that white needed to do. A couple little simple moves to keep everything together and make it work right. With the move of bishop to the d3, it is slightly different at that point, and definitely doesn't seem that easy. And so, whatever you do, remember that one of the big things is for you to advance. Get your pieces and pawns further. Make them go to the more advanced or challenging positions. d5 would have been great in that regard. So, white didn't do it. And he still won the game. Why? Because of one thing. Black waited too long. Now, the fact that white is preparing and getting ready to basically quickly set up for, moves like d5 or so, should have forced black to think more precisely, to think more carefully. But obviously he didn't, and that gives white a great shot. So it's something pretty good. Here, the f4, b4, d5 coming in place, and then after a couple of moves, white just keeps growing and keeps getting his position much better and more well placed. In a few moves, apparently white was just dominating, and black no longer had the possibility to complicate anyway. So it's a good thing to realize those things. So the whole exchange that black did and all the subsequent things really turned out very successful for white. So it was an important idea to talk about. So these are some of my major suggestions in terms of what you have to keep in mind and how to plan out. So I do hope it makes sense to you. And now let's talk about something else. Let's talk about another piece imbalance that would be instructive.